Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Lisa Buldo, and our issue is environment. Our topic is rooftop gardens. Joining us today is Laura Yip, local gardener, Manhattan Rooftop Garden Project. Laura, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So Laura, what is a rooftop garden?
Well, that's a complicated question. So there are many different types of rooftop gardens, and my rooftop garden is really a small garden in containers where I grow vegetables, primarily vegetables and some flowers. But a lot of people in the city keep gardens where they have shrubs and even trees, and other people keep rooftop gardens where the primary purpose is to insulate the building that the garden is on top of. So there's just a thin layer of soil across the whole roof, and they grow plants that absorb water and prevent evaporation and rain flow off of the roof. So these are environmentally beneficial methods of keeping a garden.
Really just having a garden right on your roof.
That's right.
That is really amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for New York City, where people may not have, the space for a regular garden, rooftop gardening is something that they can do. How does it differ from, how does taking care of it differ from the way you would take care of a garden?
Sure. Rooftop gardening is sort of more of a challenge, especially in New York, because you're growing in containers of soil, so depending on how large they are, the plant has less space to grow. So out in a backyard, the plant's roots can go deep down into the ground, even up to a couple of feet. But on the roof, it's very limited to a small space and whatever you give it, so it's dependent on your care. And also, if you're growing in containers, if it gets cold, the container gets colder quicker than the ground does, and when it gets warm, it's the same thing. They get warmer than when the ground does. So it's challenging.
How do you contain the dirt and the water?
Mm-hmm. There are different methods. So, like I said before, some people grow gardens that are supposed to cover the whole roof. So in that sense, they just have a small barrier all around the roof that's a few inches tall, and that keeps the soil in. And they may have different types of growing media, not just soil, but like maybe just other types of material that plants can grow in. And so the water will come in from the rain and be absorbed by the plants themselves in those situations, because they grow things like succulents that absorb a lot of water. And the purpose of those types of gardens is to absorb that water and keep the building cool. Whereas in mine, I keep my soil and water in containers, and they're just about this large, and I just have a lot of them, so
how many
keeps growing.
I guess it depends on the size of the garden then.
That's right.
The size and how many containers, right?
Absolutely.
And are there certain types of plants that will and won't work for rooftop gardening?
Definitely, and it depends on the kind of container or the method that you're growing in. So in containers, you want to keep the plants the right size for the container. So if you're a beginner gardener, you will want to start in as large a container that you can get, or get onto your roof, because if the container is larger, then the issues that I was discussing earlier, where it gets colder faster or warmer faster, are less of a problem because there's more soil and the plant is a little more buffered from the environment. It also will retain water better. So if you're growing something like tomatoes, you'll want a large container. And if you can only have small containers, then you'll want to start smaller. So you could grow lettuce. It's a really popular plant to grow. You can grow spinach and other leafy vegetables like that. I focus on vegetables, so that's why I talk about them. But if you're growing other types of plants, you can grow small flowers. Annuals are great, and they're beautiful. And if you're growing a rooftop that covers the whole roof for environmental purposes, you would grow sedums or other types of succulents that dry weather and don't need to be watered all the time.
Does this type of gardening provide organic benefits?
Absolutely. So if just gardening is a health benefit because you're outside, you're being active on a regular basis, and you're in touch with nature. So that's, a psychological benefit and a health benefit that is hard to match. But on top of that, if you're growing organic vegetables, then you know exactly what you have used on your plants. You know that you haven't used pesticides or other, fertilizers that were produced in an unhealthy manner. So you can control exactly what you're eating. And I think that that's great.
Does it help, does rooftop gardening help promote buying from local farmers?
On the one hand, you're growing your own food, so you can save some money that way. But on the other hand, once you get used to growing your own produce and eating something fresh, when it's wintertime or when it gets a little colder and you on your roof don't have the capacity to grow as much as real farmers do, you still want that fresh produce, right? So you do go to the local farmers market and you buy from the people who grow, just around New York. So.
And what caused you to start blogging about the Manhattan rooftop garden project?
Well, it's my own personal project, and back in 2007, I was a law student, and I knew that I was moving to this place where I would have access to a roof, so I wanted to start gardening. And I also realized that there weren't a lot of resources for people who had just started gardening, especially in a place like Manhattan, where not many people garden at all, and the specific challenges of growing on a rooftop are different. So I wanted to provide that resource and just share my own experiences growing on a rooftop in New York, where you might run into problems that people don't expect, like pigeons. So
good one.
Right. So most people don't expect that pigeons are going to bother your garden, but they can. So there are ways to keep them out, or just control for that kind of thing.
Can you talk about some of the ways to help control or protect your rooftop garden?
Sure. So one issue with the pigeons is that they might eat your vegetables or your berries, right? They love berries. So if you're growing something sweet, they will really love them. So you can get some bird netting and just put it up around the plants so that they can't really get in as much. Another thing that they might do, and this is one of my biggest problems, is that they'll dig around in your pots a lot. So they just throw dirt everywhere. So a way to prevent that and also to retain moisture is to mulch all around the plants. And I use bark mulch, so it comes in pieces about that large. And I put it around the plants, and it's a little bit heavier and it gets in the way of the pigeons so that they don't have direct access to the soil.
What would someone do, or what's the first step for starting your own rooftop garden?
So the first step is to see if you have access to a rooftop. So if you can get onto your roof and it's allowed, you should probably ask your landlord. If you're in a building with a landlord, they might let you go up there if it's generally accessible, and you make sure that you're not going to damage anything. So if you want a rooftop and your landlord is a little bit hesitant, you can say, I promise I won't damage anything. I'll put things under my pots so that my pots don't damage the roof at all. And I do that. So I put small layers of carpet under each pot so that it keeps the weight of the pot from making rings in the material of the roof.
So you talked about containers before. So really, you use just containers. It's not like you're doing rows of, like a regular garden. You have rows of different things. Each one that you're going to grow, you put in containers. Shield it, say, from large amounts of rain. Like if there's a lot of rain, what do you do?
I just leave it out there. On the rooftop and gardening in general, what grows, grows, and what doesn't, doesn't. So you learn from experience. If something is failing, then you just try something else, and maybe something new will thrive. So you just have to really get used to your environment that way.
If the roof isn't so high up, do you think this is something that would create family fun time at all?
Absolutely. And I know that schools often do rooftop gardens, like you were saying, in rows. So they build rows of container boxes and they fill them with soil, and they have the kids start helping out in the garden, and I think it's a great educational experience for children and for families to participate in, because gardening, it can be a group activity. I know when I was a child, my parents had me go weed, so and that was probably the worst thing. I didn't like doing it, but you know what? On a rooftop, it's not so bad because there aren't that many weeds, and you're not right next to the wild everywhere. You know, everything is sort of more organized and contained.
Are there any tips that you can suggest for our viewers who are thinking about growing a garden rooftop?
Sure. I mean, if you're going to start growing, start easy, you know. Start with large containers if you can, because if you start with small ones, you'll probably be disappointed. You'll think, why are my plants struggling so much? You know, why do I have to water them every, twice a day or however much? So start with large containers and start with plants that you know are going to work. So, large plants in large containers can be a good thing because, they deeper roots and they will absorb the water for longer and survive longer. So tomatoes are a good choice for the beginner gardener.
Tomatoes, that's good.
And they're so fun,
Yeah, and to start seeing them bloom and come out, right?
And I think success at the beginning is important because you're encouraged to continue. Exactly.
Have you seen much feedback? Have you gotten a lot of positive feedback from your blog and from the advice that you give?
Absolutely. There are people who follow my blog and they comment and they're enthusiastic, and other people they email me to ask me questions about how to start their own garden all the time. So that's really fun for me to interact with the community. And other people have come to tape, videotape on the garden and to do photo shoots and things like that.
Oh my goodness. So it's getting to be a pretty popular thing.
I mean, every once in a while, yeah, it's fun to be, noticed.
That's great. Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again for having me.
We'll be right back.